Welcome to the Silent Archive, a place where forgotten names, quiet tragedies, and the great shadows of the past go. Tonight, we're going back in time to an era of crumbling republics, battling legions, and individuals who shaped empires through a single choice: betrayal, ambition, destiny. It's all immersed in the quiet silence of forgotten historical hours. So dim the lights, make yourselves comfortable, and let the echoes of Rome lull you into the deepest sleep. The 1st century BCE was an age of titans in Rome, men of immense talent, ambition, and contradiction. Sulla, Marius, Cicero, Cato, Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar each possessed the vision and ability to elevate Rome to new heights. Yet their rivalries, ideologies, and hunger for power would ultimately tear the Republic apart. For nearly 450 years, the Roman Republic had stood as a beacon of law, order, and civic virtue. But by the time Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great faced off in open war, that system was already crumbling from within. Their conflict, known today as the Great Roman Civil War or Caesar's Civil War, was not just a clash of armies. It was the final act in the slow-motion collapse of a political order that could no longer govern itself. To understand how Rome reached this breaking point, we must go back to the mid-2nd century BCE. The assassination of the Gracchi brothers, champions of land reform for the poor, exposed a deepening rift between Rome's elite and its common citizens. Social unrest followed: slave revolts in Sicily, the bloody social war with Rome's Italian allies, and then the first true civil wars fought between Marius, leader of the populares, who drew power from the people, and Sulla, champion of the optimates, who upheld senatorial authority. Sulla's march on Rome in 88 BCE set a dangerous precedent. A general with loyal legions could bypass the Senate entirely and seize control by force. Though Sulla later tried to fix the Republic through dictatorship and constitutional reforms, he had already shown that military loyalty trumped republican law. By the 60s BCE, the Republic's system of checks and balances had become a weapon of paralysis. Senators routinely blocked essential legislation, forcing Rome into repeated crises that only dictatorship or martial law could resolve. It was in this climate of dysfunction that the First Triumvirate emerged, an unofficial but immensely powerful alliance between Crassus, Pompey, and Julius Caesar. Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, bankrolled the coalition with bribes and influence. Pompey, Rome's most celebrated general, commanded the loyalty of thousands of veterans from his campaigns across the Mediterranean. Caesar, though the youngest and least established, held the sacred office of Pontifex Maximus and had already built a devoted following among the urban poor as a populous leader. In 59 BCE, with their combined power, Caesar was elected consul and swiftly passed laws benefiting Pompey's veterans and ratifying his eastern conquests. Soon after, the Triumvirate secured Caesar an unprecedented 10-year governorship over Gaul, giving him command of legions, wealth, and glory far beyond what any Roman official should wield. But alliances built on convenience rarely last. The death of Julius Caesar's daughter and Pompey's wife in 54 BC severed their personal bond. The following year, Crassus perished at the disastrous Battle of Carrhae against Parthia. The Triumvirate collapsed. Rome descended into chaos. Street gangs led by Clodius Pulcher and Milo turned the city into a battleground. When Clodius was murdered in 52 BCE, his funeral pyre burned down the Senate house itself. In desperation, the Senate appointed Pompey as sole consul, granting him near-dictatorial powers to restore order. He succeeded, winning the full support of the optimates. But now, only 2 men remained at the summit of Roman power: Pompey in Rome, backed by the Senate, and Caesar in Gaul, commanding 10 battle-hardened legions personally loyal to him. The Senate, led by Cato the Younger, saw Caesar not as a statesman, but as an existential threat. They feared he would follow Sulla's path or worse. Caesar, for his part, knew that if he laid down his command before securing re-election as consul, he would lose legal immunity and face prosecution for his actions in Gaul. The stage was set. The Republic could no longer contain two suns in its sky. One had to fall, and so began the great Roman Civil War, the war that ended the Republic and gave birth to the Empire. The point of no return. How Rome forced Caesar's hand. By 52 BCE, the Roman Republic was drowning in political chaos, and Cato the Younger saw only one solution: destroy Julius Caesar before he could return to Rome with his army intact. That year, Cato ran for consul in hopes of using the officer's full authority to strip Caesar of his command. The moment his governorship ended, but he lost. Caesar's position remained secure for now. Over the next 2 years, the Senate led by Cato and the hardline Optimates relentlessly demanded Caesar lay down his arms. But Caesar was not defenseless. His allies in Rome, the plebeian tribunes Mark Antony and Gaius Scribonius Curio, wielded their sacred power of veto to block every move against him. The Republic was locked in a constitutional stalemate. Then came the legal maneuver that lit the fuse. Using a strained interpretation of the law originally passed by Pompey and Crassus to extend Caesar's term, the Senate declared his command expired in 50 BCE, a full year early. They ordered him to disband his legions immediately. Caesar refused. He knew the truth. His governorship was legally valid until the end of 49 BCE. More importantly, he knew that the moment he became a private citizen, the Senate would put him on trial and likely exile or execute him. In December 50 BCE, Pompey made a calculated offer. "I'll resign my command if you go first." Caesar's camp refused. Pompey must lay down his arms first, they insisted. Neither side would risk vulnerability. Trust had evaporated. That same month, Caesar marched one legion to Ravenna, just north of the Rubicon River, the boundary no Roman general could cross with troops. He sent a letter to the Senate, once again proposing a mutual disarmament. But rumors exploded through Rome. Caesar wasn't alone, he had 4 legions ready to march on the city. Whether true or not, the Senate saw only one thing: blackmail. They responded with fury, ordering Caesar to surrender at once, and authorizing Pompey to raise legions in defense of the Republic. Yet Caesar tried one last compromise. He offered to give up Transalpine Gaul, Cisalpine Gaul, and most of his army, but keep Illyricum and 2 legions until the original end of his term, plus the right to run for consul in 48 BC, which would restore his legal immunity. It was a reasonable deal. Even Cicero, acting as mediator, helped refine it down to 1 province and 1 legion. Pompey was ready to accept, but Cato and Consul Lentulus, fanatical defenders of senatorial supremacy, refused. To them, negotiating under threat was surrender. Pompey, ever the pragmatist, needed their support, so he let the deal die. On January 7, 49 BCE, the Senate struck again, voting to strip Caesar of all power. Antony and Curio vetoed the motion, as expected. So the Senate invoked the ultimate weapon, the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, the final decree. This emergency measure suspended all laws, overrode tribunician vetoes, and declared Caesar a public enemy. Within hours, the consuls Lentulus and Marcellus handed all military authority to Pompey. The Republic had chosen its champion, and Caesar, cornered, betrayed, but resolute, now had only one path left. The die was about to be cast. Years of fruitless negotiations had finally brought both sides to an absolute deadlock. The divide between the 2 factions, the Populares and Optimates, had become just as deep as it once was, when it led to the deaths of the Gracchi brothers, and the wars of Sulla and Marius. BR greater than the Populares mostly comprised young men from less prominent families, like Mark Antony, Trebonius, and Curio, or junior members of distinguished clans, such as Decimus Brutus. On the other side stood the Pompeian Optimates, aristocratic nobles, including Pompey's sons, Gnaeus and Sextus, Ahenobarbus, and Metellus Scipio, descendants of illustrious Roman lineages. Iocta estate, a profound societal chasm, divided the 2 main political camps, the Populares and Optimates, which dated back nearly a century to the assassination of the Gracchus brothers. This ideological schism threatened to engulf the Roman Republic yet again in civil turmoil. On January 10, 49 BC, Julius Caesar departed Ravenna, accompanied by the legendary Zae Legion and supporters from Rome. They stopped at a minor stream marking the boundary of Italy, the infamous Rubicon River. Crossing this boundary with armed forces was strictly prohibited. Doing so constituted an explicit act of rebellion. After careful contemplation lasting nearly a whole day, Caesar took decisive action. "Be greater than alia auctor" state. With those words, the Great Roman Civil War commenced. In the immediate aftermath of crossing the Rubicon, Caesar swiftly advanced through northern Italy, seizing critical strongholds within mere days. There was minimal opposition, most towns lacked sufficient defenses, and many locals supported Caesar against Pompey and the Optimate faction. Simultaneously, Caesar dispatched urgent commands to his legions stationed in Gaul, ordering them to march southward to provide reinforcement. Meanwhile, panic gripped Rome. Pompey initially believed Caesar would await reinforcements from Gaul before launching military operations. He wavered, uncertain whether to fortify Rome, engage Caesar directly in Italy, or withdraw entirely from the Italian peninsula. Had Pompey acted promptly, he might have mustered enough soldiers to neutralize Caesar early on. Unfortunately, misinformation hampered his efforts, leaving him unaware that Caesar had crossed the Rubicon with merely one undermanned legion. Although Pompey could raise substantial troops across Italy, he immediately commanded only two full legions nearby, the elite 1st Legion and the 15th, while the 1st Legion, formed by Pompey himself, was loyal to him. The 15th Legion was originally raised by Caesar, casting doubt upon their allegiance. Moreover, most of Pompey's experienced legions were scattered far away in Spain and the eastern provinces. Pompey's retreat and Caesar's rise. The turning point of the Civil War. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in January 49 BCE, Pompey the Great faced an impossible choice. He knew he couldn't risk a premature battle. His best legions were stationed in Hispania and the eastern provinces, and Italy was unprepared for war. But he also held a strategic advantage: the full resources of the Roman Republic. Pompey could afford to play the long game, so he made a decision that shocked Rome. He abandoned the Eternal City. With him fled the majority of the Senate, both consuls, and thousands of loyalists. The ancient historian Plutarch later wrote that for many Romans, wherever Pompey was, there was their country. But Cassius Dio offered a darker view, claiming Pompey's retreat alienated even his own supporters, who saw it as cowardice disguised as strategy. In their panicked evacuation, Pompey's faction left behind something unthinkable: the treasury of Rome and the sacred temple treasures. For Caesar, this was a gift. Rather than waste time seizing an undefended capital, he bypassed Rome entirely, choosing instead to hunt Pompey and secure key cities across Italy, cutting off enemy supply lines and winning over local populations. Yet Caesar's early momentum came with a painful betrayal. While most of his allies, Mark Antony, Curio, and others, rushed to join him after the Senate declared him an enemy, one man chose a different path: Titus Labienus, Caesar's most trusted lieutenant and co-commander during the Gallic Wars. Still in Gaul when the Rubicon was crossed, Labienus could have brought vital legions to Caesar's side. Instead, he renounced his former commander, swore loyalty to the Senate, and fled to Pompey's camp. This defection struck Caesar deeply, not just emotionally, but strategically. Labienus knew Caesar's tactics inside and out, and his military skill rivaled that of both Pompey and Caesar himself. Still, Caesar's legions remained loyal. The 8th and 12th legions marched swiftly into Italy, joining their general just in time for the next critical confrontation. As Caesar pushed south, Pompey regrouped near Capua, assembling a new army from loyal veterans and hastily raised levies. But not all his commanders followed orders. Domitius Ahenobarbus, ignoring Pompey's strategy of delay, took 30 cohorts, roughly 3 legions, and fortified the strategic crossroads town of Corfinum. When Caesar arrived with 3 battle-hardened legions, Ahenobarbus' raw recruits immediately lost heart. They begged their commander to surrender, and he did. Here, Caesar revealed the weapon that would define his campaign: clemency. He pardoned Ahenobarbus, who soon rejoined Pompey anyway, and offered the surrendered troops a choice: go home or swear allegiance to him. Most chose the latter. Overnight, Caesar transformed 3 enemy legions into his own 15th, 16th, and 17th legions, growing stronger, without firing a single arrow. He swiftly dispatched these new forces to prepare invasions of Sicily and Sardinia. While continuing his march south, his mercy at Corfinum echoed across Italy, quelling resistance and earning him widespread support. Towns opened their gates willingly, and soon Caesar raised 3 more legions, the 18th, 19th, and 20th, from local recruits inspired by his reputation. In just weeks, Caesar had turned a desperate gamble into a sweeping campaign, proving that in civil war, forgiveness could be more powerful than force. Pompey's great escape and Caesar's global gambit. By early 49 BCE, Pompey the Great knew the truth. Italy was lost. Caesar's lightning campaign had shattered his hopes of holding the peninsula. Rather than risk a doomed stand in the south, Pompey made a bold strategic pivot. He would abandon Italy entirely and regroup in Greece, the heart of Rome's eastern power. There, battle-hardened legions from Syria, Asia Minor, and Macedonia awaited him. Client kings he had once defeated and, later turned into allies, now pledged troops and treasure. From Thessalonica, Pompey began assembling a truly imperial coalition: Roman legions, Thracian cavalry, Numidian archers, and fleets from the Aegean. But that wasn't all. Pompey still commanded powerful forces in Hispania's 7 elite legions that could strike at Gaul from the west. His grand strategy: encircle Caesar, starve Italy by cutting off grain from Sicily, Sardinia, and North Africa, launch a 2-front war from Spain and Greece, crush Caesar between east and west. Before he could build a navy, but first he had to escape. Caesar, racing south with 6 veteran legions, nearly caught him at Brundisium. Desperate to trap Pompey like Spartacus decades earlier, Caesar laid siege to the port and ordered engineers to build a massive breakwater across the harbor, blocking every ship from leaving. Pompey responded with ingenuity. He mounted wooden siege towers on merchant vessels, turning civilian ships into floating fortresses that rained missiles on Caesar's workers. The tactic worked. Night after night, Pompey's fleet slipped past the incomplete barrier. Under cover of darkness, he evacuated his remaining troops across the Adriatic Sea, leaving Caesar master of Italy, but not of the war. With Pompey gone, Caesar entered Rome in triumph, not as a conqueror, but as a savior of the Republic. He convened the Rump Senate, declared Pompey an enemy of the state, and crucially seized the treasury and temple gold, using it to fully equip his 6 newly formed legions. Yet Caesar knew victory in Italy meant nothing if the war went global. Without a navy, he couldn't chase Pompey to Greece. So he turned west, where Pompey's Spanish legions posed a mortal threat to Gaul. In Caesar's own words, they were an army without a leader, and he intended to destroy them one by one. His plan unfolded with ruthless efficiency. Sent legate Valerius with the 16th legion to take Sardinia, dispatched Curio with 2 legions, 15th and 17th, to secure Sicily, ordered both to prepare an invasion of North Africa. Rome's breadbasket, both islands fell without a fight. Cotta fled Sardinia the moment Valerius approached. Cato, despite raising local levies in Sicily, abandoned the island rather than face 2 veteran legions. Within weeks, Caesar controlled the western Mediterranean grain routes. Then, barely a month after entering Rome, Caesar marched again, this time toward Spain. With the 18th and 19th legions at his back, he left Mark Antony in charge of Italy and assigned the 20th legion as reserve for Curio's African campaign. But his path was blocked at Marsilia, modern Marseille. Though claiming neutrality, the city now reinforced by Domitius Ahenobarbus, Caesar's old foe from Corfinum, shut its gates and began stockpiling grain. Caesar, with no time for a long siege, left Trebonius with 3 legions to besiege the city by land, while Decimus Brutus, proven naval commander from the Gallic Wars, took command of a makeshift fleet of 12 ships to blockade the port. The stage was set. while Caesar raced towards Spain to crush Pompey's western army. A naval showdown loomed off Massilia and across the sea. Pompey was building an empire in exile that could drown Caesar in men, money, and grain. The civil war had gone global. Caesar in Spain, the brutal stalemate at Ilerda after securing Italy, and dispatching forces to Sicily and Sardinia. Julius Caesar turned his full attention west to Hispania, where Pompey's most loyal and experienced legions awaited. Though Pompey himself had fled to Greece, he left behind a formidable command trio, the scholar Marcus Varro, and to hardened veterans of the Sertorian Wars Lucius Afranius and Marcus Petraeus. These men knew Iberia like no others. Together, they commanded 5 battle-ready legions, 8,000 auxiliaries, and up to 10,000 cavalry, nearly matching Caesar's own force of 2,500,030,000 legionaries, 5,000 auxiliaries, and 6,000 Gallic cavalry, all veterans of the brutal campaigns in Gaul. The two armies converged near the river Sicarus, just outside the hilltop town of Ilerda, a strategic crossroads controlling the only stone bridge. Into the heart of the peninsula, Afranius, ever cautious, took the high ground on the western bank, stripping the land of supplies and daring Caesar to cross. Caesar's legate Fabius, who had secured the Piran passes in advance, responded by building 2 wooden bridges 6 kilometers apart. But the campaign quickly turned treacherous. During a routine foraging mission, a sudden storm destroyed one bridge, stranding 2 legions and their cavalry escort on opposite banks. Afranius seized the moment, launching 4 legions and his entire cavalry across the stone bridge to crush the isolated Caesarines. Only swift reinforcements from the second bridge saved Caesar's men from annihilation. Though they retreated in order, it was clear these were not Gauls or Germans, these were Romans. Just as disciplined, just as ruthless. When Caesar himself arrived in June with his elite cavalry guard, he took command and immediately tested Afranius' resolve. He marched within 200 meters of the Pompeian camp, offering battle, but Afranius refused to descend from his stronghold. So Caesar changed tactics. He would build his own fortress in the enemy's shadow. Night after night, his legions dug trenches under fire, constructing a fortified camp that soon became impregnable. Then came his boldest move, an assault on a key mound between Ilerda and Afranius' camp, a position that, if captured, would cut off the Pompeians from their supply base in the town. The battle that followed was one of the fiercest of the civil war. Caesar's 14th Legion charged uphill only to be driven back by Afranius' Iberian hardened troops. The 9th Legion rushed to support, but in their eagerness, they overextended, funneled onto a narrow slope beneath Ilerda's walls, and pummeled by missiles from above. For 5 brutal hours, the two sides clashed in a chaotic melee. Caesar later claimed the day as a draw: 70 dead, 600 wounded on his side, versus 200 Pompeians. But the truth was clearer. He had lost. The mound remained in enemy hands. His men retreated, and soon after, disaster struck again. A second storm flooded the Sicarus, washing away both bridges and severing Caesar's supply lines. Now isolated, low on food, and watching as Afranius intercepted his 6,000 auxiliary reinforcements from Gaul, killing 200 and scattering the rest, Caesar faced a grim reality. His Spanish campaign was on the brink of collapse. This was no longer a war of conquest, it was a fight for survival. And for the first time since crossing the Rubicon, Julius Caesar tasted something unfamiliar: doubt. Caesar's ingenious escape, and the collapse of Pompey's Spanish army trapped in hostile territory, cut off from 6,000 auxiliary reinforcements and running dangerously low on food. Julius Caesar faced his most desperate hour in Spain. The river Sicarus, swollen by storms, had destroyed his bridges, and Afranius' Pompeian legions controlled the only stone crossing. Starvation loomed, but Caesar was never more dangerous than when cornered. Remembering the hide-and-wood boats of the Britons from his Gallic campaigns, he ordered his men to build lightweight vessels from timber and animal hides. Under cover of night, a small detachment hauled these boats 34 kilometers upriver by wagon, crossed the Sicarus unseen, and seized a hill on the eastern bank. From this fragile foothold, they helped construct a new bridge reconnecting Caesar to his supply lines, and allowing his long-awaited Gallic cavalry to finally join the fight. With fresh troops and mobility restored, Caesar turned the tide. His elite horsemen began raiding Pompey and foraging parties, forcing Afranius' men to scavenge under moonlight. Local Iberian tribes, sensing the shift in fortune, started sending grain and auxiliaries to Caesar's camp. To tighten the noose, Caesar even began diverting the river itself, creating a shallow ford near his camp to bypass the distant bridge entirely. Afranius, now starving and surrounded by defectors, realized retreat was his only hope. He secretly ordered a pontoon bridge built 30 miles south on the river Ebro, and began evacuating his army under cover of darkness. But Caesar was faster. He sent his cavalry to harass the Pompeian rear, slowing their march to a crawl. Then, wading through the partially diverted Sicarus with 5 legions, he raced south to cut off their escape. By midday, he reached the mountain passes first, blocking the only route to safety. Afranius tried to outflank him with light troops, but Caesar's cavalry encircled and annihilated them. Trapped between mountains and enemy lines, the Pompeian general had no choice but to entrench on a barren hill, his army slowly running out of water. Then, something unexpected happened. At the river, soldiers from both sides, many of them Iberians, who knew each other, began talking. Old friends shared wine. Officers crossed lines to speak with Caesar himself. The war, for a moment, felt human again. Caesar, ever the strategist, saw this not as weakness but as victory. By refusing to force a bloody battle, he had shown mercy, and in the Roman world, clemency was a weapon more powerful than swords. Within days, Afranius and Petraeus, abandoned by allies, outmaneuvered, and out of options surrendered their entire army without another fight. Meanwhile, at Massilia, Brutus' naval triumph, while Caesar fought for survival in Spain. Decimus Brutus faced his own trial off the coast of Massilia, modern Marseille. The city, loyal to Pompey, had built a fleet of 17 agile warships outnumbering Brutus' 12 heavier vessels. But Brutus had one advantage. His crews were legionaries, volunteers hardened in Gaul, trained for close combat. The Marsilians, farmers and fishermen, pressed into service. When the fleets clashed, the Marsilians used speed and archery to pepper Brutus' ships from a distance. But the moment they closed in, grappling hooks flew, Roman marines stormed enemy decks, and the battle turned into a slaughter. In hand-to-hand combat, the legionaries were unstoppable. By day's end, more than half the Marsilian fleet lay sunk or captured. The blockade held. Caesar's western flank was secure. The fall of Pompey's Spanish army, and the siege that broke Massilia by the summer of 49 BCE. The writing was on the wall for Pompey's forces in Spain. Trapped, starving, and demoralized after weeks of relentless harassment by Caesar's cavalry, the Pompeian legions under Afranius and Petraeus had lost the will to fight. Even their commanders were divided. Afranius quietly accepted defeat, while Petraeus, ever the hardliner, tried to restore order with oaths of loyalty and executions of Caesarine sympathizers. But it was too late. The brief moment of fraternization between Roman soldiers, once enemies, now sharing wine and memos at the riverbank, had already revealed the truth. This civil war was tearing Rome apart from within. When Petraeus ordered a desperate retreat back toward Ilerda, Caesar's forces shadowed them every step of the way. After 3 grueling days of constant cavalry raids and blocked river crossings, the Pompeians collapsed onto unforgiving terrain, exhausted, thirsty, and surrounded. Caesar, channeling his victory at Alasia, began encircling their camp with earthworks, cutting off all hope of escape or foraging. Faced with total annihilation, the Pompeian army surrendered without another battle. In a masterstroke of political theater, Caesar offered full clemency. Officers and soldiers alike would be spared, disarmed, and sent home so long as they swore never to take up arms against him again. They accepted gratefully. With 5 legions now under his control, Caesar dispatched 4 to escort the defeated troops to safety, then marched the 7th and 10th legions into further Spain to confront Marcus Varro, Pompey's last hope in the west. But Varro's position had already crumbled. News of Ilerda's fall spread like wildfire. Local Iberian tribes defected en masse. The gates of Gades, once a loyal stronghold, were shut in Varro's face. Even one of his own legions mutinied, striking their standards in open rebellion. Abandoned by allies and army alike, Varro surrendered without a fight. Caesar placed Quintus Cassius Longinus in charge of the province, and reorganized Varro's 4 legions into the 21st through 24th, now loyal to him. In just 2 months, Pompey had lost his entire Spanish army, Marsilia's last stand, and Brutus' naval masterpiece, while Caesar secured Spain. The siege of Marsilia, modern Marseille, raged on. The city, fortified on a narrow peninsula, ringed by high walls and bristling with ballista, was a nightmare for attackers. Trebonius, commanding the land forces, had built trenches and towers but struggled to advance under constant sorties and missile fire. At sea, Decimus Brutus maintained a tight blockade with his makeshift fleet. But Pompey wasn't done yet. He sent Lucius Nasidius with 16 warships to break the siege. The Marsilians, having rebuilt their navy to 17 ships, joined forces with Nasidius, outnumbering Brutus nearly 2-1. Yet numbers meant little against Roman discipline. In the naval battle off Torwar, Brutus lured the enemy into close combat, while the Marsilians relied on archers and agility. Brutus' crew's legionaries, trained for boarding actions, used grappling hooks to pull enemy ships alongside and slaughter their crews in hand-to-hand combat. In a dramatic climax, 2 Marsilian ships tried to ram Brutus' flagship in a pincer but collided with each other instead, sinking instantly. Nasidius fled without firing a shot. The Marsilian fleet limped home, 9 ships lost, and never sailed again. Caesar, ever respectful of civic courage, praised the Marsilians as brave defenders of their city, but acknowledged they were no match for the armor, training, and ferocity of Roman legionaries. With naval supremacy secured, Trebonius turned to his final weapon, a 6-story siege tower, 9 meters wide, with walls 2 meters thick, layered brick by brick under protective screens. From its heights, Roman archers rained death on Marsilia's defenders. A 20-meter covered gallery like a mobile fortress allowed troops to advance safely to the walls. The end was near. The siege of Marsilia ends, but the war spreads to Africa after months of relentless effort. The Romans had nearly broken Marsilia. Their colossal 6-story siege tower, armored with clay and tile to resist fire, stood poised against the city's walls. Beneath its shadow, a 20-meter covered gallery, a mobile fortress on wheels, allowed engineers to safely undermine the Marsilian defenses. Brick by brick, they pried the tower's foundation loose with crowbars and chisels, while defenders above hurled rocks and burning pitch in vain. The wall began to crack and tilt. Realizing collapse was imminent, the Marsilians begged for a truce, claiming they wished to await Caesar's personal arrival to negotiate terms. Trebonius, ever cautious with his men's lives, agreed and pulled his legions back. But it was a ruse. Under cover of night, the Marsilians launched a desperate sortie, torching the Roman battering ram, siege ramp, and even setting fire to the great tower from within. Months of labor vanished in flames. Yet this victory was hollow. The city was starving, disease-ridden, and cut off from the sea. Brutus' navy had already crushed their fleet. When Caesar arrived with the 7th and 10th legions, fresh from his triumph in Spain, the Marsilians knew the truth. No help was coming. They surrendered. Only one man refused to yield, Domitius Ahenobarbus. In a final act of defiance, he seized 3 ships, slipped past Brutus' blockade during a storm, and escaped to Greece, vowing to fight another day. Caesar left the 18th and 19th legions to garrison Marsilia, and marched back to Italy with his veterans. In just 7 months, he had driven Pompey from Italy, crushed Pompey's entire Spanish army, disbanded 5 legions, and absorbed 4 more, secured Sicily, Sardinia, and now Marsilia. The West was his. Curio's fateful gamble in North Africa, while Caesar fought in Spain. His lieutenants waged war across the Mediterranean. By May 49 BCE, Valerius held Sardinia, and Curio, Caesar's fiery ally from the Senate, controlled Sicily with the 15th, 17th, and 20th legions. Together, they prepared to strike the ultimate prize, North Africa. Why Africa? Because modern-day Tunisia was Rome's breadbasket, the source of grain that fed the Republic. Control it, and Caesar could feed his armies while starving Pompey's hopes of blockading Italy. Command of the invasion fell to Curio, a brilliant orator, but a novice in war. To balance this, Caesar assigned him seasoned officers like Rubicus, a veteran of Alasia. Their force, 4 newly raised legions, raw but numerous. Opposing them was Publius Attius Verus, Pompey's governor in Africa, who had scrambled to raise 2 legions and called upon a dangerous ally, King Juba of Numidia. Juba owed his throne to Pompey and hated Caesar and Curio personally, after public insults in Rome. When news of Caesar's victory in Spain finally reached Sicily, Curio crossed to Africa in August, but underestimated his enemy. Confident in Roman superiority, he brought only 2 legions, likely the 15th and 16th, and 500 cavalry. Landing near Utica, he quickly seized the old Castra Cornelia, a puny fort just 5 kilometers from the city, and sent his cavalry to raid supply convoys heading into Utica. Verus responded with 600 Numidian horsemen, light, swift, but no match for Roman cavalry in close combat. The Numidians were routed, their supplies captured. Meanwhile, Curio's fleet blockaded Utica's harbor, packed with 200 unarmed merchant ships, ripe for the taking. But Curio's arrogance would soon meet its match. He did not know that Juba's full army was marching toward Utica, and that the open plains of Bagrodas would become a killing field. The African campaign had begun, and with it, the first major Caesarian defeat of the Civil War. Curio's rise, and the trap at Utica after securing the surrender of Massilia, and the grain-rich islands of Sicily and Sardinia. Julius Caesar turned his attention east, but not before entrusting a critical mission to one of his most loyal allies, Gaius Scribonius Curio, tasked with conquering North Africa, the Republic's breadbasket. Curio landed near Utica in August 49 BCE with 2 legions and a bold strategy. His campaign began brilliantly by issuing a proclamation that any merchant ship refusing to deliver supplies to his base at Castra Cornelia would be treated as hostile. He forced the unarmed fleet in Utica's harbor, over 200 vessels, to surrender their cargoes without a fight. The Caesarian army was now well-fed, well-equipped, and confident, so much so that the troops hailed Curio as Imperator, a rare honor for a commander yet to win a major battle. Emboldened, Curio marched toward Utica to build a forward camp, but his inexperience showed. He failed to scout the area properly. Suddenly, a large Numidian force appeared on the horizon. King Juba's cavalry, sent ahead of the main army. Though caught off guard, Curio reacted swiftly. His cavalry charged, scattering the lightly armed Numidians, who retreated into Utica in what was likely a tactical withdrawal, not a rout. Yet cracks were forming. The next day, 2 centurions and 22 soldiers defected to Pompey's general Publius Attius Verus, claiming Curio's men were losing faith. In truth, many of these recruits had trained under Varus officers at Corfinum and still felt bound by old oaths, sacred vows in Roman eyes. Rumors of mutiny spread through the camp. Curio, however, proved his mettle not with swords, but with words. In a rousing speech, he reminded his men their oaths to Pompey's lieutenants, like Ahenobarbus, were void. Those men had surrendered at Corfinum. They now served Caesar, the victor of Spain and master of the West, and they had just hailed him as Imperator, proof they were on the winning side. The speech worked. Loyalty was restored, and the next day, Curio marched out to force a decisive battle. The battle across the ditch. The 2 armies met across a steep, 2.5-meter ditch, a natural barrier that favored the defender. Verus opened with a classic Numidian maneuver, light cavalry and skirmishers. sweeping around the Roman flank, but Curio countered brilliantly, sending heavy infantry cohorts and cavalry to meet them head-on. The Numidians, unarmored and untrained for melee, broke instantly. Their supporting infantry was surrounded and slaughtered. Seizing the moment, Curio ordered a full advance across the ditch. Varus' recruits levied, less than 6 months earlier, panicked. They fled in disarray, trampling each other in the narrow pass back to their camp. Varus himself was wounded, nearly killed. More men died in the retreat than in battle. Caesar later claimed Curio lost only 1 man, surely an exaggeration, but the victory was real. Varus abandoned his camp under cover of night, slipping into Utica with the remnants of his army. Curio began siege works around the city. Victory seemed certain. Then came the news that changed everything. King Juba of Numidia was marching to Utica with elephants and an army numbering in the tens of thousands. The fatal mistake: at first, Curio dismissed the reports, but as more messengers confirmed Juba's approach, now just 36 kilometers away, he wisely withdrew to the defensible Castra Cornelia, fortified the position, and requested reinforcements from Sicily. It was a sound plan: hold the coast, keep supply lines open, and wait. But Juba was cunning. He sent fake deserters into Curio's camp, claiming Juba had been called away to quell a rebellion and that only a small detachment under Sabura remained. Flush with recent victory and eager to prove himself a true general, Curio believed the lie. He marched out once more, this time not against Varus, but into the open plains of Bagrodus, where Sabura's small force waited alongside the full might of Numidia. The trap was set, and Curio, brilliant orator but untested commander, walked straight into it. The disaster at Bagrodus, Curio's last march in the dead of night. Gaius Scribonius Curio abandoned the safety of Castra Cornelia and led his exhausted legions toward the Bagrodus River. Convinced he faced only a small Numidian detachment under Sabura, he left just 5 cohorts behind and pushed his men through 28 kilometers of punishing terrain driven by overconfidence and the false reports of Juba's absence. His cavalry, sent ahead as scouts, stumbled upon Sabura's advance units and routed them easily. Prisoners confirmed Sabura commands to Curio. This meant victory was within reach, but it was a trap. Unbeknownst to him, King Juba had already reinforced Sabura with 2,000 elite Gallic and Spanish cavalry, his personal guard and seasoned infantry. Sabura feigned retreat, luring the Romans onto a vast, open plain, perfect terrain for Numidian warfare. There, Curio's army, already weary, with only 200 cavalry left fit to fight, was surrounded. Light Numidian horsemen swarmed the flanks, peppering the legions with javelins. Heavy Gallic cavalry charged from the rear, breaking Roman formations. Any cohort that broke ranks to chase was instantly encircled and annihilated. Desperate, Curio ordered a breakout toward nearby hills. The Numidians let them go, then closed in and slaughtered them to the last man. Realizing all was lost, Gnaeus Domitius, prefect of horse, urged Curio to flee. "I will never face Caesar after such a disaster," he replied, and died fighting. The 15th and 16th Legions, 11,000 men, were wiped out. Survivors fled to Castra Cornelia, but panic seized the garrison. In the chaotic evacuation by sea, overloaded ships sank. Only a few officers, Rebellus, Marcius Rufus, escaped. The rest surrendered to Verus. North Africa remained in Pompeian hands. Caesar's western victories were now shadowed by catastrophe in the south. Caesar's crisis, and the race to Greece back in Italy. Caesar faced mounting troubles. Curio's defeat meant Rome's grain supply remained vulnerable. Gaius Antonius, Mark Antony's brother, lost 1.5 legions in Illyria to defection. The veteran 9th Legion mutinied, furious over unpaid wages and heavy losses in Spain. Caesar acted swiftly. He confronted the 9th, threatened decimation, then, showing his famed clemency, executed only 12 ringleaders. Loyalty was restored. To legitimize his rule, his ally Lepidus proposed Caesar be named dictator just long enough to hold consular elections. Caesar became consul alongside Publius Servilius, then resigned the dictatorship after 11 days, preserving his image as a republican reformer, not a tyrant. With Rome stabilized, Caesar turned east. Pompey was amassing a colossal army in Thessalonica. 9 legions, 60,000 men, 7,000 cavalry, 4,000 archers and slingers, reinforcements en route from Syria under Metellus Scipio. But only 4 legions were veterans, the rest raw recruits from across the empire. Caesar, meanwhile, gathered 10 under-strength legions at Brundisium but had ships for only half his army. Worse, Pompey's navy, commanded by Bibulus, blockaded the Adriatic. Yet Caesar held one secret advantage. He knew the true date. As Pontifex Maximus, he understood the Roman calendar had drifted. While Bibulus believed it was winter and kept his fleet in port, Caesar knew it was still late autumn. Under cover of darkness, he sailed with 7 veteran legions, leaving slaves and baggage behind. By the time Bibulus realized, Caesar had landed in Greece. Furious, Bibulus burned 30 of Caesar's returning transports, trapping the rest of Caesar's army in Italy. But Caesar quickly seized Oricum and Apollonia, then made a fatal error. He sent Vibullius Rufus, a twice-captured prisoner, to negotiate with Pompey. Vibullius betrayed him, revealing Caesar's position, strength, and strategy. Pompey raced to Dyrrhachium, a vital supply hub. Though Caesar had a head start, Pompey's false march, brutal on his inexperienced troops, got him there first. Labienus, now Pompey's top general, rallied the army with a public oath of loyalty. Caesar withdrew to the southern bank of the Apsus River. A tense standoff began. The blockade breaks, and Antony's daring rescue for weeks. Neither side attacked. Pompey, wary of his raw recruits, refused to assault Caesar's veterans. Caesar, outnumbered to 2-1, used the stalemate to his advantage. He sent raiding parties to harass Bibulus' navy as it came ashore for supplies. Soon, Pompey's sailors were drinking dew from leather tents. Desperate, Bibulus tried to negotiate, but Caesar saw only weakness. Shortly after, Bibulus died, leaving the fleet leaderless. Meanwhile, Mark Antony, trapped in Brundisium, saw his chance. In January 48 BCE, he loaded 3 veteran legions onto every available ship and made a daring dash across the Adriatic. Almost intercepted, he landed at Nymphaeum. Pompey rushed to cut him off, but local allies warned Antony, who fortified his position and messaged Caesar. When Pompey realized Caesar was closing in from the south, he retreated to avoid a 2-front battle. At last, Caesar's full army was united in Greece, but the war was far from over. Scipio's Syrian legions threatened to join Pompey. Pompey's son Gnaeus destroyed Caesar's remaining fleet, cutting him off from Italy. Caesar was now stranded in Greece, outnumbered, outsupplied and facing the largest army Rome had ever assembled. The stage was set for Dyrrhachium and then Pharsalus. The siege of Dyrrhachium, Caesar's gambit and Pompey's escape with his navy destroyed and cut off from Italy. Julius Caesar knew he had to force Pompey the Great into a decisive battle, and soon. In April 48 BCE, he feigned retreat, then launched a lightning march toward Dyrrhachium, Pompey's vital supply hub on the Adriatic coast. The ruse worked. Pompey, initially believing Caesar was withdrawing due to starvation, only realized the truth when his scouts reported the Roman legions closing in. Caesar reached Dyrrhachium first and seized the high ground. Pompey arrived days later and encamped just south, his army vastly superior. 53,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry secure sea-based supply lines. Caesar, by contrast, had only 3,500,000,000 40,000 men, forced to scavenge from a land already stripped bare by Pompey's foragers. Refusing to be outmaneuvered, Caesar turned to his signature tactic, fortification. Using the rugged, hilly terrain, he began constructing a massive circumvallation and network of walls, ditches, and forts designed to encircle Pompey's entire army and cut off his supplies. It was an audacious plan, a smaller, starving force attempting to besiege a larger, better supplied one. Pompey responded in kind, ordering his men to fortify every hilltop, forcing Caesar to stretch his lines thinner and thinner. Skirmishes erupted daily. In one fierce clash, the 9th Legion under missile fire on a contested slope nearly broke, but at Caesar's command, they executed a disciplined countercharge, repelling Pompey's light troops and withdrawing in perfect order. By late June, Caesar's lines were complete. He had pinned Pompey against the sea, a feat no Roman commander had ever achieved against such odds. He even controlled all freshwater sources, forcing Pompey to dig wells and rely on seawater shipments. But Pompey was no fool. He loaded his cavalry onto ships, landed them north of the lines, and unleashed them on Caesar's rear, raiding, foraging, and disrupting supply routes. Then came the trap. In early July, Caesar received word that disloyal citizens of Dyrrhachium would open the city gates for a price. He rode to the outskirts with a small escort, only to be ambushed by Pompeian cavalry, barely escaping with his life. He returned to find Pompey had launched 3 simultaneous assaults on his fortifications. The fiercest attack struck a hilltop held by just 500 men of the 6th Legion. Under a storm of javelins, they held until Publius Sulla arrived with reinforcements. All survived, but every man was wounded. Caesar suspected the defectors were Pompey's agents, and he was right. The breakouts and Caesar's near disaster. Pompey's luck turned when 2 Gallic officers, veterans of Caesar's Gallic campaigns, deserted, bringing detailed knowledge of weak points in the defenses. They revealed a fatal flaw at the southern end of Caesar's lines, where the fortifications met the sea. The 9th Legion's outer and inner walls were not yet connected. A gap remained just wide enough for ships to land troops behind the lines. Pompey struck with precision. 30 legionaries attacked the inner wall. Light infantry landed behind the outer wall. More troops poured into the gap between the two. The 9th Legion, only 1,000 men on duty, was surrounded on 3 sides. They broke. Reinforcements collided with fleeing soldiers in the narrow corridor, causing chaos. Mark Antony rushed 6,000 men to the rescue. Caesar himself arrived with another 6,500. But Pompey had already broken the blockade, building a new fort south of Caesar's lines. Determined to seal the breach, Caesar launched a counterattack with 17,000 men. His left wing stormed Pompey's old fort, but his right wing got lost in the maze of trenches. Wasting precious time, Pompey responded with overwhelming force. 25,000 heavy infantry and cavalry. Caesar's right flank collapsed. Men trampled each other, fleeing through narrow gaps. Inside the fort, Caesar's left wing, fearing encirclement, also retreated. In the chaos, a panicked soldier tried to stab Caesar. Only his bodyguards saved him. The attack had failed. Caesar lost nearly 1,000 legionaries, 200 cavalry, and 32 officers. Worse, Pompeian forces executed all prisoners on Labienus' orders, a grim message to Rome. Pompey was hailed as imperator but refused the laurel crown, saying, "I do not celebrate victory over fellow Romans." Yet he made a fatal mistake. He did not pursue. Had he chased Caesar's broken army, he might have ended the war that day. Instead, he let Caesar retreat in good order to Apollonia. The road to Pharsalus begins. Though defeated, Caesar remained defiant. To his men, he said, "Just as Gergovia preceded Alasia, so too will Dyrrhachium precede a greater victory." But his position was dire. His army was depleted and scattered to legions under Domitius Calvinus. Were isolated in Macedonia, 1 rookie legion held southern Greece. Local support evaporated. After news of his defeat spread, Caesar's only hope: unite with Domitius before Pompey could crush them separately. Both armies began a desperate race across Greece. Pompey marched to join Metellus. Scipio Caesar raced to reach Domitius. 4 days, they moved in parallel, just hours apart. Then, fortune smiled on Caesar again. The same Gallic deserters who had betrayed him at Dyrrhachium switched sides once more, warning Domitius of Pompey's approach. Domitius repositioned and merged safely with Caesar. Now, for the first time since landing in Greece, Caesar's veteran legions were united. Pompey, however, still held the advantage in numbers, supplies, and allies. Confident that Caesar would soon starve, he adopted the Fabian strategy of avoiding battle, wearing the enemy down. But his officers grew restless. "We have the numbers," they urged. "End this now." Reluctantly, Pompey began to consider a final, decisive clash. The stage was set for Pharsalus, where the fate of the Republic would be decided, not by walls or tricks, but by legion against legion, general against general, Caesar against Pompey. Pharsalus, the day the Republic died by August 48 BCE. The Roman world held its breath. To Titans Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great stood on the plains of Pharsalus, their armies drawn up for a final reckoning. The stakes, nothing less than the soul of the Republic. Pompey had not wanted this battle, but his camp was fracturing. Cato, Scipio, Afranius, and even Cicero accused him of cowardice, some whispering he had been bribed by Caesar, with his officers demanding victory and his allies already dividing Caesar's property in their minds. Pompey had no choice. He marched down from the hills and onto the open field. His army was immense. 47,000 infantry, 7,000 cavalry, the largest mounted force Rome had ever assembled, legions from Syria, auxiliaries from the east, and veterans of a dozen campaigns. Caesar's force, barely 22,000 weary men and 500 horsemen, though some historians believe he concealed his true strength, possibly fielding closer to 30,000. But numbers weren't everything. Every man in Caesar's ranks had marched with him since Gaul, some for over a decade. They were not just soldiers, they were a brotherhood. Pompey's plan was bold, inspired by Alexander the Great. His infantry would hold the center like an anvil. His massive cavalry, led by the traitor Labienus, would sweep around Caesar's right flank. Then they'd crash into Caesar's rear, hammer meeting anvil, crushing the rebellion in one stroke. Caesar saw it coming. He placed his elite 10th Legion, his favorites, on the right, opposite Pompey himself. On the left, the battered but unbroken 8th and 9th, now merged into one under Mark Antony. In the center, steady veterans held the line. And then his masterstroke. From his ranks, Caesar pulled 3,000 of his best infantry, armed them with long spears, and hid them as a fourth line, angled to face the cavalry. At dawn, Caesar gave the order, "Advance." His men charged, then halted mid-stride when Pompey's legions refused to countercharge. In a display of discipline that stunned even their enemies, they reformed, caught their breath, and surged forward again. Javelins flew, shields locked, the lines crashed. Then came the moment of truth. Labienus unleashed the cavalry. Caesar's horsemen, hopelessly outnumbered, fled as planned. But as Pompey's riders wheeled to strike Caesar's rear, they ran straight into 3,000 spear-wielding veterans. The cavalry, many of them young nobles with no taste for close combat, shattered. Within minutes, they were fleeing to the hills. Now it was Pompey's flank that was exposed. Caesar threw in his fresh third line. The pressure became unbearable. One by one, Pompey's legions broke, starting with those who had once fought beside Caesar in Gaul. And Pompey, seeing his line collapse, he turned and fled, abandoning his camp, his men, his cause. Caesar stormed the Pompeian camp. Thousands surrendered. Among them, Marcus Junius Brutus, son of Caesar's former lover. Caesar, overjoyed, embraced him, ordering his men to spare Brutus at all costs. The cost of the battle? Caesar claimed only 200 dead. Pompey's losses: 15,000 slain, 24,000 captured. Modern estimates are more modest, but the outcome was undeniable. Total, decisive victory. Yet Pompey escaped, sailing east with 30 loyal guards, hoping to rebuild in Syria or Egypt. He chose Egypt. There, the boy King Ptolemy I, whom Pompey had once helped place on the throne, sent a small boat to greet him. Aboard, an old comrade, Lucius Septimius, and the Egyptian general Achilles. As Pompey stepped into the skiff, he quoted Sophocles, "He who enters a tyrant's door becomes his slave, even if he leaves a free man." He never reached the shore. Septimius stabbed him in the back. Achilles cut off his head. His body, naked, dishonored, was tossed into the sea. When Caesar arrived days later, Pompey's head was presented to him as a gift. He turned away in disgust, then shown Pompey's signet ring, the same one worn during their alliance, their marriage, their shared rule of Rome. Caesar wept. They had been friends, co-consuls, family. Now, only one remained. But the war was not over. Cato, Scipio, Labienus, and Pompey's sons fled to North Africa, vowing to fight on. The Republic's last defenders would make their stand in the deserts of Thapsus and the hills of Munda. Yet Pharsalus marked the turning point. The Republic was dead. The Empire had begun. If this boring tale of legions, oaths, and fallen republics left you thoughtful or finally ready for a peaceful night, rest, do us a small favor. And if you want to support boring stories for night directly, consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you for listening. May your dreams be as deep as the Tiber, and much less bloody. Good night. Tap the like button, it tells YouTube this story deserves to be heard. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a chapter of history's quietest dramas. And if you know someone who dreams of Rome, Carthage, or distant battlefields, share this video. Sometimes, the past needs a voice and you just gave it one. History doesn't shout. It whispers from dusty archives, from charred scrolls, from the shadows of forgotten names. To hear these whispers, subscribe to the Silent Archive. The silence is just beginning.